so lovely, Emma Barnett.
Hello.
Very nice that you're here. We've taken a while to sit in front of each other.
We have. Thank you for your patience.
Well, I'm just so happy that you're finally here. And you're an award-winning broadcaster, you're a journalist, you're an author, and a mother, and a partner. And what I think you are is this kind of life force that has the mind the size of a planet, that looks at all the shit that's around the world and you want to make it into a coherent narrative so that you can understand it.
I do like to understand, and comprehension is key in my life and what I try and do. Yes, you're right about that. And I wasn't expecting you to say shit, and I really enjoyed that, because when there's a microphone, I just have it so drilled into me, do not swear.
I didn't plan on saying shit. It's just
I'm really happy it came out.
I want to talk to you about your challenges. Is there a particular challenge that you are facing or you have faced?
Oh, yes. And largely, and certainly in the last 10 years, they relate to the old womb, the business of being a woman, certainly in my case. I have had very serious health challenges in the last decade. I was finally diagnosed with endometriosis, and then a couple of years later...
Which is incredibly painful.
Yes, but people always think it's just, in inverted commas, painful periods. I now understand it's a whole body inflammation disease, which it's really giving me a run for my money. And so is adenomyosis, which is the other condition that I have. The man who diagnosed me with that sort of gave a laugh and said, "Don't worry, it's the elephant in the womb. We know even less than we do about endometriosis." So,
with a laugh.
Almost no point knowing, which actually, in a weird way, he's not wrong about with my latter adventures in trying to understand that. And I have a disease, two diseases, about which not very much is known. So you can understand on top of pain and all sorts of leg aches and mood and all sorts of issues that are linked to hormones and inflammation, I do want to understand it, and I can't. In fact, just before I saw you, I was on the phone to a doctor outside your house trying to understand why 5 months of work with this doctor has resulted in nothing.
And I imagine that sort of fury of your kind of fierce intelligence that is forensic, trying to get to the nub of something, and then the people you're working with, almost like they come from a different place, that you don't feel like they're looking at it in the same way as you, or they're not being straight with you, is it?
I mean, I think they want to help. I do have to believe that, and you can make things personal in life. You know, I remember when, of course, now linked to what I've said about endometriosis, I have had 7 IVF rounds to have our 2 children. And, you know, halfway through, I had our first IVF round on the NHS. I was eligible for that, and that actually worked after 2.5 years of trying. I then stayed with the same team in the NHS, which not a lot of people know you can do. You have to pay because you've used your free round, if you're lucky enough to live in a postcode where you do even get one, or 3, I believe the limit was where I was. And this is a long way of saying halfway through that experience, you could think, well, I should go somewhere else. These people aren't understanding me, I'm not understanding them. But of course, it's not them. It's the odds of the game. It's a massive casino, what I was doing. And what anyone does who goes through this. So I do try and depersonalise, because I'm a person, but I'm also another person with this. I'm another woman with this issue. And it's become a big part of my life, trying to find a way to live in my own body.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It is. It is. And it's really hard all round, but it won't always be like this, because nothing ever is. You know, actually it's got worse as opposed to getting better, so that's change in itself. Someone who's very close to me yesterday said, you know, you're so strong, and I think it's quite nice somebody has that view of you, but you can't be strong all the time when you're trying to figure something out. So I'm in the middle of it at the moment.
And so how do you manage that kind of like wanting to understand, being able to absorb and make coherent tons of information, and then hitting yourself against a brick wall the whole time. Both how do you manage living with the pain of two diseases, but also the history of so much loss of the 7 IVF. I mean, because in my understanding, a new loss will always ignite a previous loss. So it feels like if you did a sculpture of your losses, you know, of the IVF, your miscarriage, the endometriosis, the adenomyosis.
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 It's a bitch to have and a bitch to say.
What enables you to manage the pain of it and also the kind of frustrated fury of it, I think you must feel.
Pain is very isolating. I now realise that. Weirdly, when you're going through IVF, there's a goal. And now I'm having to deal with the fact that there is no goal to endure this for. This is just how I am. I think I talk a lot to my husband. I talk a lot to a couple of friends who have the same disease. We are sort of sisters in it. One of them really uses the phrase a lot, and I say it to her if it helps her. I think it does sometimes. This too shall pass, you know, whatever the latest symptom or moment is. But I lived for a long time relatively well with it. And I know that I've been very lucky to get to 40 and it not have been like this my whole life. Equally, it's still not how it is for some women. So I'm on a spectrum, and I try and contextualize things. I try and still be what I naturally am or want to be, which is, however I can, a bon vivant. I love a drink with lunch, and I like to talk with people. I think talking largely is my medicine, which hopefully will be music to the ears of a therapist, but sometimes you don't want to talk. I am naturally, when I am myself, an optimist. I am. Pragmatist.
You wouldn't have
optimist.
done 7 rounds of IVF if you weren't an optimist.
Yeah, optimist / fighter. You know, I will try. I mean, trying and the idea of trying and the word trying, obviously very associated with trying for a baby, but...
And your newsletter.
I do write a newsletter under it, and I regularly think with lots of people I have the privilege of talking to, we're all just trying, you know, how else could you explain it? And I have these 2 beautiful children, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to be there, you know, as much as I can and be as good as I can. So it sounds a really strange thing, but now having gone through these bouts of ill health, especially since our daughter was born, it's been very hard indeed, because my hormones have changed, my body's changed, the disease has changed. I'm trying to learn myself what it is at the moment and how I am. It's going to sound strange to say, perhaps, I don't know. I really like myself. I really like myself when I'm well and okay and being like me, you know. And so the goal is always to get back to that. That is the goal, and honour the promises of the relationships I have.
How did your parents get you to like yourself? What do you think they gave you?
Yes, I'm an only child. And
I always think that's a negative way of saying. It's like only is not enough.
Yes, I'm a solo child, a single child, the only one. So I think it's funny when you say you're an only child, or however you want to say it, because people do tend to give you a look like, are you okay? And I had a good time. I didn't know any different. I had lots of people all around, and I feel I was very much bolstered in a sense of support and love and encouraged.
And believed in.
Yes, and I was showered in kisses, and I still do the same to my children. I'm sure I won't be allowed soon. They're 2 and 7. But yeah, I felt very, very loved. Very, very loved.
And was there a sort of environment of curiosity and learning and reading and, you know, was there a kind of feistiness? Because that's what I get from you is like a feistiness. And I don't know if it's just within you or it was an environment that you were brought up in.
I think there's a few parts of that perhaps, but I'm no person of your background, but I think Manchester's a very specific place. You know, the north is, and I know it's not as north as it could be in this country, but I do think there's a Manchester spirit, there's a Manchester ethos to me. And that's
It's
not
very
really...
sparky. Whenever I've been to Manchester, there's this.
Yeah, there's an energy.
There is a real great positive energy, and like
And you
no
don't-
bullshit.
Yeah, no bullshit. You don't take yourself too seriously. You don't necessarily accept what someone's saying to you, not because you think they're lying, but you might play with it. I also think that's Jewish culture. The festivals have parts of them inbuilt where you are meant to ask questions. You are meant to challenge authority in a good way, in a sort of way that's encouraged. I also believe my school was very instrumental. It's a girls' school. It's a very special girls' school because of its history in terms of how it was set up by this group of women who were then called spinsters. We wouldn't call them that now, but largely unmarried, who wanted women to be educated. Yes, it is a private girls' school, but it has a very large bursary scheme. It also is the place where the Pankhursts sent their daughters.
Oh, wow.
It has a rebel spirit to it.
A DNA.
I do believe that. Yes, it's a highly focused on education place, but it had enough in the system for you to push back a bit, I found. Not everybody will have found that who went to that school. So there are a few elements maybe of my existence where I felt those things could be there.
I mean, that really makes sense to me as a sort of foundations of your parents, of your Jewish culture, of the school, of the geography of where you were, that all of that kind of fits as building blocks to you.
Good, I'm happy it makes sense. Never really put it like that before, but I like to answer questions as well as pose them if I can, do it well.
What's it like being interviewed?
Yes, I mean, if you write a book or you've done something worthy of being interviewed, perhaps you have to accept the role reversal. But it's strange. I think this is interesting because of what you do for a living. I feel it's different, again, to having your exact profession on you because you're not a journalist.
No.
So it's kind of it's a different space again.
Yeah, I'm more interested in your internal world and how that plays out in your external world. And so as I was listening to you and the kind of robustness of your beginnings, and a kind of secure attachment of being loved, of being encouraged. There's a lot of research about knowing where you've come from, that you have strong roots, give you strong roots to live with adversity. And I was thinking about the 7 IVF attempts, your miscarriage at 7 weeks, which I'm kind of saying speedily, which must have been utterly devastating after so many IVF attempts and so much hope, and that hope is a kind of cruel master.
I definitely went off hope for a while.
Do you want to say more about that?
Well, no, just I remember writing about it as well and being really sort of pissed off with hope. And I think it's a strange thing, but you've got nothing else in control except your feelings and how you respond to them. And, hope is a cruel mistress. But then it's the thing that gets you back up again. It's a very complicated thing. But I did a lot of our IVF just like that, because it was lockdown. So it was me and my doctor. My husband wasn't allowed to come to any of the transfers, as they're called. And it's a really intense experience anyway. And then you're in a hospital with very few people, or certainly in your part of it. And me and a man called Tarek made my child. Our child. Obviously, my husband definitely had a part to play, but that was intense. But, the hope gets you back in there. It really does.
Yeah, and it kills you when it fails you. It's like the fury with hope.
Yes.
Because it's given you this false promise and then it betrays you. And then it is the only thing that you can trust in, I guess.
I know. It's very dramatic.
Yeah, it's a quixotic master.
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
So what I'm having a kind of understanding of is you look at things as clearly as you can. But pain is very psychological, both the wanting something like IVF, but also the suffering of pain. And I think there's quite a lot of research to show that there's a lot of depression that comes with pain. There's massive mental health side effects in relationships, that it becomes the third person in the family, in the marriage. And that you kind of can lose your sense of self because the pain takes over. It kind of fragments who you are. And I can hear that you're saying, I always want to get back to myself. Because also, if you jump into it, it can then overwhelm you. So there is a way that you have to find a way of getting your head out of it.
I have a disease. I can't control it, sadly. So I've had to learn various techniques over the years and deploy them. And I think it's probably added to the fight in me. I believe on air, certainly, with the job that I do, we have a really big duty. And I've been at the BBC now since 2016. But I've worked at other places alongside that. I had a show on Bloomberg. I've been part of other cultures. I was at the Telegraph for many years. I was at LBC. Wherever I've been, I really think we have to inform, especially at the BBC, but we also have to entertain people. And I'm in the business of making you turn the radio up, turn the TV up, not getting out of the car, not being late for your appointment. I want to keep your attention. And I don't take that position lightly. And I say that I think my fight is part of the reason why I am where I am at this point in my life, career-wise, because I remember one of the political interviews, and I do lots of other types of interviews, but when I was at 5 Live, where I was when I first joined the BBC, I was there for 6 years, and I had a programme on a mid-morning. I've always been a 10 a.m. woman till this recent 6 a.m. malarkey. And there was an interview that could have just been an interview.
Ordinary.
Yes,
Yeah.
about Brexit. And this guy came on from Labour, and I just didn't understand what he had said to me. And all I remember about it, and I didn't do it for show, was I just kept saying, can you just say it again? Because Labour had a couple of positions on Brexit at this point. I'm sorry to take everyone's mind to past news, but that was the moment those political interviews started to take off. And it wasn't by design. It was because I wouldn't let it go. I was thinking about it from the point of view of the listener. And then I was just finding it kind of
Bewildering.
And that's how I am. I can't be anyone other than me. And I then think on air, one should make it as good as possible. And I think making it entertaining, a conversation on a microphone for me should always be a conversation on steroids. You can cut out all the boring bits, get to the good stuff. It's not advisable in real life. I've learned that the hard way, and get to it. And I think that
there is an intensity that you bring to that.
There's an intensity. And people then just, sometimes think or say, I don't mind it per se, but, oh, I'd hate to get into a fight with you. And that's not how I am all the time. But I'm on air. And
that's my job.
It's a job. And I'm also there to tease out what someone might not want to say or might not be able to say in a more sensitive settings. But I know they want to say it. If someone's in a studio and they've consented to it, unless they want to not do it halfway through, that's never happened yet. But I'm there to get it out and do so in a way that engages people. And I think we need to do that more than ever. But I think the fight part of me, the passion part of me, there's an urgency. I've always had an urgency. And I wonder if some of that sometimes is that I dispense with niceties because I'm in pain sometimes. Like, yeah, I'm in a hurry, or I've got to get this sorted, or come on, what are you saying? Let's do it. And then there's the mank in me, and that comes out again.
That makes sense, doesn't it? How the pain has changed you in the sense of that your perspective about what really matters is also changed. And what you have patience for.
It can augment you, for sure. So I was just trying to give an example of, I slightly remember, I don't think I was very unwell in any way that day particularly, but I also had it commented on that I always lean forward when I'm on a microphone. So it's not a relaxing experience. I'm sort of wired to do it. And when I did first move over to television, I'd done quite a lot of TV, but when I first moved to Newsnight as a more weekly, regular thing, I was like, this desk, how am I going to sit at it? And I was so used to I'm a very active listener and active talker, and I can't miss a thing. That's how I feel about it.
That's what we hear, though, too.
Sorry, so I've slightly digressed, but it was more, I think my body and me and how I am, it's kind of linked.
I don't know if this puts it succinctly, is that you have this ferocious curiosity and sort of determination and line that you want to kind of get to understand something. And then on the other hand, you have these diseases that you cannot control, that you have to find a way of living with, that you have to find a way of allowing yourself to be you. And there's something about the buttons they push in you that in some way give you not less force when you're working, but more.
Maybe, but all the effort it just takes to get up and do it sometimes. So if I've made it there, we're going to do it well. You know, that's on a good day. It's not always possible. It's not always, I'm not saying every day is, even if you're feeling great, every day won't be always like that. But I think I have an extra impetus sometimes, perhaps.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I don't know.
Shall we talk about your wonderful book, Maternity Service?
Here it is. Yes, you're holding it.
Which I loved. I read in one sitting and I nodded my way through it from all my perspective, but also my children's perspective, who had children, and my daughter-in-law's perspective. And actually what I wanted to start with is I wrote a book called Every Family Has a Story. And did you know that the etymology of family is the Latin word familia, which means attend, servant, and slave?
I did not know that. That's great. Well, that's blown my mind. Okay, let's go with that. No, I did not know that. I love learning new words and new meanings, rather.
And so the kind of meaning of family is to serve.
Thank you for telling me that. Why didn't I look that up myself? But you've done that bit of work for me. I was on mat service. I was doing my time. I didn't have enough time to look that up. But that's brilliant. And it's so thoughtful.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite deep in a way.
Because don't you think, I don't know if you would agree with this, Julia, but maybe it was my era, again, thinking about things I've not really thought about properly before, but when you're a child, everything seems really easy and happy. You're not the parents. I just thought life would carry on in some ways, very naively, as it was before I had children, that, you know, you just are seeking pleasure, joy.
Just grow your family.
Yeah, you have your family, but you carry on just having loads of fun, travelling. And then obviously you have children and there's so much love. There's a whole other person, you know, you come home with a whole other person. I was like, Jeremy, there were 3 of us now. There's 4 of us, you know, that's what you bring home from the hospital.
You fill up a car.
If you're very lucky. But life suddenly has many more moments of serving and the trudge and the drudge. And I've obviously been on service, maternity service, because one of my arguments is maternity leave, you know, or one of my thoughts doesn't end when you go back to work. If you go back to work, it keeps going. I've been on it for 7 years now and I've learned a lot and I've still got loads to learn, of course. I'm only 7 years in, but I think we need to reframe as well what we think of as wanting happiness the whole time. Don't you think that's sold to us in our society?
That you just manifest your dream.
And that you
all I want from me or for my children is happiness.
Yeah, and that all the time, like wall to wall. And I think
it's completely unrealistic.
It is, isn't it?
It's completely unrealistic.
And do you agree, though, that that's kind of sold all the time?
I think it's sold all the time. And I think expectations have so much power to destroy our lives. There's expectations that we put on ourselves. I'm not saying we shouldn't have expectations, but if you have realistic expectations that are likely that you can reach, then you have this sense of agency and connection between who you are, where you're aiming, and what you can achieve. And if you have these false expectations, these kind of dream expectations, I'm not saying we shouldn't have dreams, but if you actually think they're my right and I have a right to happiness, you're going to wake up most days and be disappointed in that life isn't giving you the happiness that your expectations have promised you.
And I think I say in the book, I believe that, because obviously it was written in quite a haze. Well, no, but that was the whole point. Just if I may say this one thing about, I'm very into going to galleries and art, and it is one of my happy spaces. And I was inspired by a conversation I had not long ago with Tracy Emin and how she'd captured her pain on the page, and also her joy and her love. And I thought, what if I could just capture maternity leave while it's happening? And it's written in a total frenzy. It's been obviously a bit tidied up since by people. We've got computers and not between naps. And I did do it on a computer, but some of it was just done on my phone walking around the park. And I thought I need to capture it. So I wrote it like it was live, and it was a bit inspired as if an artist was trying to just get something down.
It felt like that. It felt like I was with you as you were in the park.
There was
or
like an
at home.
immediacy, I
Yeah.
hope, that feeling. But
And the fury about people saying to you, enjoy every minute.
yeah, it's really hard because you can't enjoy every minute of anything. And then you feel guilt if you're not loving it. And it is very complicated. But the other idea about expectation is I do say that I do think women are the least prepared that they have ever been for motherhood. And I don't just mean practically, as in I hadn't had a baby ever around me, I hadn't changed a nappy. I mean, I'd seen some friends who'd started a bit earlier, but you don't really do anything. You might hold the baby for a few minutes. But our expectations are being the stuff of lovely, wonderful feminist dreams a lot of the time.
Or movies.
Or movies and what's in our public imagination. And, you know, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, and lots of people won't have the choice to do anything different. But I did work before my firstborn to, I think, 8 days before. And that was like coming to an emergency brake stop in my life. I remember being bored, to be bored in the same way for the week before he was born, wondering what I'd do next, you know, have a pregnancy massage, maybe go for a walk. And then little did I know that many walks were ahead of me in quite that way, that were quite fraught with crying and various other trying to get baby to nap and all those things as well. That soundtrack that's always going about what we're doing next. COVID was going to happen, and then I was going to go into the washing machine, rather, of IVF. You know, my whole thing was, and I had no idea. My expectations had been, I hadn't actually had any expectations, to be fair, to become a mother by this point because it had taken so long. But once I got on board, I mean, I genuinely didn't accept I was having a baby till I was in the...
You didn't dare. The hope would let you down too often.
Didn't dare. But once I got a hold of that expectation and had it as a reality almost all at the same time, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that so much would change. And that's really naive, and I admit that now. But I had really been playing hard and working hard and going at 1,000,000 miles an hour up until that point.
And so what is the message in the book that you're wanting women to know that you felt that you somehow hadn't got the memo?
Well, there's that element of it, and that's how I start. But I just came up with maternity service rather than leave. And I'm not looking for a debate on it. Should we officially change it? I'm not going to launch a campaign. And you know, other people have talked about these things before. But I do think the framing of it towards service, this sort of calmer, quieter, harder, longer, love-filled, because service and duty are also related to kindness, is a better tempo. It's a better, more realistic experience, or sort of shaping of the experience. And I think I also really wanted to bear witness and have a testimony of maternity leave, maternity service itself. I've read a lot of books about motherhood, not least working, you know, for years and years at Woman's Hour. I've read
Rachel Cusk and
yes,
Philippa Perry.
love Rachel Cusk, love Matrescence by Lucy Jones. But I hadn't read a very faithful portrait to the minutiae of this time. And I had already, for instance, when I reread it the other day for the audiobook, I'd totally forgotten. I know it's a detail to me, but it might prompt a memory in someone else, which is why I think mothers might want to reread it themselves from a while ago and just have the experience, and new mothers alike. I hope that's the case. I'd completely forgotten I didn't wear my wedding ring the whole time I was on maternity service, the whole time I was doing it. I know that's a small thing, but how could I forget that? I looked at my hand every day. It had annoyed me. My hands had swollen during pregnancy. I couldn't get it back on. And I wanted to wear my wedding ring. It was a consistent part of my identity from before. It's a small thing, but a massive thing.
It's a massive thing.
And that's almost a metaphor for the whole experience. A small thing, but a massive thing. Because everything in your domestic comes into view.
Magnifies.
I couldn't believe I'd forgotten it. And I just think this is a time of women's lives. And yes, we hope men will do more and share more if there are men in the picture. That we're so trashed during, physically and emotionally, and sleep deprived, that apart from photos of the baby looking cute and a few with you, I mean, your mums are never in the picture because they're taking the picture to that extent. I just wanted to try and have a faithful recollection of it, if nothing else, and see what it may be prompted in another person.
And that more honest picture is great moments of love and joy, but the toil, the sleeplessness, the relentlessness, that it's never over. You know, motherhood is never over. But, you know, when you're awake at 4 a.m, I think you said something like you saw inside the second
of
every
a single minute. Yes.
And I know exactly that feeling. I remember tiptoeing out of, you know, my daughter's bedroom that I'd sat in there in the freezing cold, kind of patting her back and then creeping out. And just as I got through the door, she started crying again. But where every minute of that felt like an hour.
Yes. I think the one that I remember is standing in the kitchen, needing to get our daughter up, had already prepared the snack for my son to go and pick him up from school, but knowing it wasn't quite ready to get her up to go. Like, there was an exact time. So there was just this dead 11 minutes. Now, you can't go and read a book. You can't go sit down and relax in that time. You're not going to start watching something. Maybe you have a podcast on. That particular day, I'd done all the chores. It was a really sunny moment in the kitchen and I just watched the clock. And I know that you can do that. And I know that's okay. But that had never happened in my previous life. I just slobbed about when I wanted to.
Because you had
I just wasted time when I wanted to. But this was just a feeling and I really remembered it and I wanted to record it. And there's so many women who've already been in touch when they've heard about the book, which has been brilliant. And as we're talking, it's not quite out yet, but they get it. They get it immediately. And they really love it and they're bringing new things to it and they're saying things. And that's the great thing about putting an idea out in the world. And then there are just a few people who, one guy did make me laugh. He was like, you're going to send your child an invoice at the end. It's not a service, you know. If you didn't want children, don't have them. You know, you get a bit of that. And I would hope, you know, it's not just because I had IVF, but I have written this in such a way that really explores, but hopefully assumes I don't still have to say, and women don't still have to say how much they love their children and how grateful they are. But there is this caveat. You ask a woman about motherhood or this time or something, and even that sentence, enjoy every second, it's loaded with nostalgia and a lack of fidelity to what it can be like.
Well, it paints a picture of a sort of blooming mother with pink cheeks holding her baby who's sort of thriving and blossoming. And the reality is there may be part of her that does feel like she's thriving and is in love with her new child, but she's also tries on clothes and can't get them on. She can't do all the laundry and the snack and the pumping or the sanitizing of the bottles, and you've just changed their nappy and then they do a poo all over again and you have to change the whole outfit and you're, you know, and you're covered in poo.
Poo war stories are brilliant. I mean, they do stick in your mind, but yes.
Literally.
Yes, literally. Yeah, and the outfit one it's amazing, the power of your mind, as you will well know, but I do remember and share in the book about going to the shops for the first time, clothes shops on my own, and snatched an hour to myself and having this whole idea of what I could look like and then putting on the thing that I thought would work. And I was a complete stranger to myself. It looked absolutely awful. I didn't look how I thought.
But I think what you're describing is that you lose yourself, the version of yourself that you had.
Yeah, and of course you gain and you keep gaining, but the gains aren't visible for quite a long time in the way that you might feel the gains in some way. I also find it interesting. I always get pegged as a career woman, you know, just in one sense, not by everyone, but often have been. And I am also very much a home woman at the same time. I have designed various parts of my life very carefully to be home and to do things. I've tried and pretty much succeeded in it. I've never worked a Friday ever since having children. It has been more that I've tended to do 5 days in 4, for instance, but having that day and then doing exactly the same for our daughter 5 years later has been really important to me. And not everyone can do that either. I accept that. But trying to have a faithful portrait of life at home also felt even more urgent for my daughter, you know, having written this, so that I think we could have a conversation, I would hope, if she was interested and then hopefully could have children, in how to not stop maybe 8 days before, and those expectations, and not to put people off. You know, there's been another trend I've noticed with certain newspaper writers, columnists, journalists talking, oh, stop complaining, that the sort of slummy mummy thing went too far, and those blogs and mums now and all those things, as if that's going to halt the demographic issues that we've got. I don't think that. You know, I don't think anybody listens enough to anybody else to change their own actions most of the time, if life's taught me anything. I'd so love to ask you what you think of Mel Robbins and the Let Them movement. Do you know that?
No.
Okay. Is it Mel Robbins?
Yeah. What
That's
is it?
the whole of the chat. Mel Robbins is a very successful writer, and she's a former lawyer, and she has this theory of let them. So people don't change. You have to learn to let them.
I think that's probably true. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, when people ask your advice, they really take the advice that they've already decided on.
Yeah. So can we never change anyone?
I think we can kind of collaborate together and influence each other.
Influence.
It would never, you know, if you were my wife, I couldn't change you. And you can't go into a relationship thinking I'm going to change them. I'm going to get them to be the version of the person I want to be. I think in an attuned kind of relational relationship where you know, you're not just marrying your unfinished business, but you get together to build this third entity, which is the relationship in your life together, then you can influence each other and shape each other. I mean, in the smallest practical ways, my husband was never early for aeroplanes or trains. 45 years later, and I panic. So I want to be there hours before. He now, even when I'm not with him, texts me saying, I'm here an hour and a half early. What's happened to me? So, you know, I think in small ways you can influence.
That's a nice
and you
way of
can
putting
shape people. Not shape people. You can, I think you do. I mean, I think often what you hate most about the other person is what you hate most about yourself. So you really have to work on yourself. And that may change how you are in relation to them. And that then does change the relationship. There's no question that if you're different with someone, they're likely to be different with you. So that's the energy. If I change how I am, your response to me will be different. So that the other side of it would be that I'm right, you're wrong, but you versus me. Whereas in a kind of relational relationship, it isn't I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, let's look and see what it is and how we can get to the place that we both want to get to.
Because I love that. Thank you for explaining. Because I think this is a bit of a digression, but I think let them isn't, I know she doesn't mean it like give up, but I think there's a sense of sadness for me that you can't influence. But that's perhaps not what she's saying, but that's how it gets kind of shared.
I mean, it sounds angry. It's like, fuck off, let them in one way. The energy of it isn't.
Yes, it might.
It isn't compassionate. It's like, don't waste your energy.
But I think it's compassionate to the person, perhaps, who's been trying, maybe. So, well, I've digressed. Sorry. I got a bit interested in your view on that, which is a problem because I like asking questions. Sorry.
I like being asked questions.
Okay. Well, I usually have you on the radio.
Yeah, you do. So to get us back to where we were, to where we are you changed by people? Influenced by people?
I'm a great listener to people's experience and I like experts. So I have surprised myself, especially in recent years, as to how influential I find some of my nearest and dearest, and especially friends I've made. And often because IVF through to endometriosis, we talked a bit about both, but I've had sisters on those roads.
IVF fairies, are they good?
IVF fairies, yes. That was because I met a woman, I was hosting an awards evening and she had been hired to hand me the awards and sort of sort them out. She was a lovely woman. And it was my first night injecting, and I'd never done it before. And it felt really transgressive to go with a needle to a toilet at a hotel and while I was working. I didn't know
It's scary.
how was I going to be after this thing. I didn't know how to do it. And it just so happened, she saw me rummaging through my bag and she's like, everything okay? And she'd had IVF and she became my first IVF fairy. And she told me to eat pineapple and Brazil nuts, something I just did relatively religiously because she told me to with not much evidence. And luckily I like both. And she and I check in still a little bit on each other. And there was no other reason. I find a lot of community in that. And I have been influenced by people, not just in those scenarios, but because I think maybe also journalism does train you to ask things and listen. I'm not saying I always do it, but I think I've got that tendency. I've got a muscle for it.
And also, I can see it as you were thinking then, that what you've heard hangs around. So you kind of percolate it and you kind of give it different arguments, maybe from different perspectives, and then you decide whether you'll go with it or whether you'll think, no, I'm going to discard that. I would imagine is how you operate.
Yes. I think sometimes you can obviously ask too many people too many things, and I've done that before, trying to figure something out or whatever. But I think it is good to be influenced.
It's too lonely just thinking you've got it. I've got this.
Yes, and I like the composite, and I like thinking about other people's experiences. I mean, the older I get, one of the joys of live broadcasting as opposed to podcasting, which is, obviously brilliant and takes you into different headspaces, but live, especially if you have access to the listeners, which I have had a lot in all the jobs I've had, is you are so often so far from what you think people across the UK are going to say about something is so different. And I think that's a very healthy thing to know in and of itself, that how you think about something couldn't be further. I mean, I rarely share what I think per se because of the role of host and impartiality, although there are obviously things where I'm allowed to say, but it amazes me and amuses me and tickles me and is healthy to know.
It's really healthy to know that we're as different on the inside as we look on the outside, that you can't make an assumption that you see this person dressed in this way or you give this person an identity that's in Manchester or Scotland and you assume they'll have this view. And once you get to know people, you're really wrong. I was on a retreat with 120 other people last week on a training, learning about something called internal family systems. And it's so interesting, the process of being in a room with 120 people that you've never met in your life before, that 6 days later, what you assumed about this person or your emotional response without saying or speaking to that person is completely transformed by being with them and by being open. And we did obviously quite kind of psychologically and emotionally deep exercises, so you get to know people in a fast track way, that by the end that you can actually have an intimacy with 120 total strangers after about a week. It's rather amazing.
It is. That would be. Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But it's the honesty. It's the lack of performance. It's not putting on a show. It's that we all showed each other our internal worlds. That's what it was about.
The other quote that I put in the book that I was interested to hear your view on, or perhaps bring the bearing of your experience and wisdom, is the Leila Slimani one, the French author, where she just talks about us. I can't quite remember the exact words, but the lie gets passed from mother to mother. Like the generations don't manage to tell each other exactly what it was like to become a mother. And I just thought that was so interesting. And it's a benign lie a lot of the time. It's not because anyone's trying to hurt anyone. And are we incapable of truly sharing the experience because we're so biased through our love that it all washes out and it's all nice anyway? And she seems to be saying she wants that honesty. Just that's what made me think of it when you talked about the honesty.
I think a bit like childbirth, there's a way that we forget intentionally because it's painful and we have a kind of mechanism of denial. I think a big thing transgenerationally from mother to daughter and son is this idea of protection. Like, I want to protect you. I don't want you to know that I suffered because of you. And in the past, I can't imagine that I would have been honest about how difficult I find aspects of child rearing and parenting. I could now that they're kind of in their 40s. But I think we want to keep our children innocent and we don't want to ruin the experience. But I think it's mainly protection. But protection actually keeps people ignorant and unprepared.
It's an interesting point about protection and that being bound up in why. And I do think generally people benefit from being more prepared.
And the truth, however
Yes.
difficult the truth is you can deal with the truth. You can't really deal with a fantasy.
Okay, must be truthful. Thank you. 2 children.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I've not been lying. I don't want to think I've been going around just lying all the time, but it's
I mean, people
it's
now
interesting.
have dilemmas about Father Christmas. I'm not worried about that. I mean, I love this book. I love your voice.
That's very kind.
It's funny. It's agony. I recognize myself in every page. Do you want to tell us, if you can remember them, some of the survival strategies?
Yes, it's definitely not a manifesto or a manual, but there are some tips I felt that were good along the way because it was my second tour of duty and I felt some of them come back, the bobble on the wrist, so you can, if you've got long hair, tie it up and breastfeed or feed or deal with poo in a difficult place. The uniform, I did become Steve Jobs briefly. I had
Black
5
t-shirt.
stretchy black polo necks or t-shirt, very forgiving, looks good with most things. 2 pairs of maternity black jeans that was very sad to give up because they're so comfy. Why can't more jeans just have that stretchy band at the top? Pack my pram and my stuff the night before, so even no matter how tired I am, if I'm sterilising, whatever, it's ready by the door. And try and be out at 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean, that was my personal preference. It depended on how your night went, but before midday, ideally, so you could see
Otherwise,
some.
you feel like the day's gone.
Yeah, the sunlight, if there is any. And I do describe myself as basically trying to find anyone to socialise with. I kept lists of people who work different hours, might have a lunch spot, because I do get my energy from people. And there's a story in there about going to see my cousin who's over from abroad, and it nearly wasn't worth it. The preparing of me and the baby to go, the getting there on the tube, as I live in London, and then when we were there, all our daughter did was sort of gnaw at me, be sick, burp and scream. So I was on my feet the whole breakfast. But it's a good memory. I've already rubbed out the edges and on balance, it nearly wasn't worth it, but it just was. And that to me, like really that story displayed the rub of all the mental preparation. I'd had to go to check where I could take the buggy if there was a lift, all that gymnastics to get there. And then it was awful, but it kind of wasn't because I got a hug from my cousin and she got to see the baby. And then you go home and it all starts again.
But also there's a satisfaction.
Yeah, you do make it. You do make it. I was very adventurous one week as well. I think I say this as well.
You went to Manchester or Birmingham?
It was Birmingham. And we didn't leave the train station. We went to 2 different restaurants. It is a very impressive train station.
It is. It's one of my favourites.
And the baby change was just 5-star. I mean, if I was reviewing...
Birmingham New Street.
Oh my God, they've got it right in that. But the reason it was risky, apart from it being my first big journey just with her and having done things like that, I'm sure with my son, but it was a bit out of practice, was because she hadn't pooed for a week. And baby change on the train, and my son never not went regularly. So this was a new thing that our daughter was trying out.
So worrying.
It was like a bomb.
You think it's going to come out of their mouth?
It's like a
What's
poo
going to
bomb.
happen?
I was just like wandering around. What is going to happen? So we just didn't leave the train station, and it was highly convenient. And she didn't poo the whole way there or the whole way back. Sorry to our daughter in advance.
Yeah. She won't be listening to this. This will be long gone by the time she
Okay, well, maybe not.
So, thinking of your challenges, and you've had so many, and I think how you deal with them is some of it is kind of forensic research, some of it is grit determination, some of it is friends, a glass of wine, a playlist, and some of it is, I actually don't think this is true, because I was going to say that you have to let go what you can't control, you have to surrender, but I don't think you surrender.
No, I mean, there are times, going back to what we were talking about before, where you just have no choice in some ways, physically and emotionally, to
That's
just,
more like despair, no?
yeah, maybe. But surrender or give in to things is not a position I easily find myself in, no.
So do you have a kind of position that you're in now that you're wanting to take forward, how you manage family, work, endo?
I mean, while these years are blessed and I didn't know if I'd ever have them, certainly with two children, and especially at the beginning with any,
And a boy and a girl. It's pretty clever.
I don't know how that happened, but here we are. I think these are quite trench-like years in many ways. As you know, I'm not by far not the first person to talk about the pull from various directions. I'm kind of holding on, I would describe right now, and taking the joy where I can and doing the best I can while I can and how I can. I feel like we'll emerge, my husband and I and myself and our family, into a slightly different space. I'm reassured of this at some point. So I sort of, keeping on is, if you asked what the sort of approach is, I don't know if I've got a better.
Do you know what enables you to keep on keeping on?
So you don't mean tools, because obviously we've talked about that, like music and vodka.
Yeah, music and vodka's good.
Okay.
But I mean, I think you have a kind of force that is in you, that is innate in some way.
Curiosity is quite a big energy, which you've
Huge. Yeah.
highlighted. I'm sort of interested in life, in what can happen when I'm really thinking of it, as you're asking me to do, rather than just head down kind of in it. I wonder if it's seeing how far one can push something, an experience. You know, I don't live in the city where I was born. I moved. I know it is far from Manchester to London, but I'm building a life here, so it's not all the things I knew from home. I always think it's interesting when I sometimes pause to reflect. My husband's from here. He's not moved, you know. I still feel quite excited about where I live.
And those colouring books.
Yes, we have. We've done Colour Your Streets, which is neighbourhoods, and some bespoke ones as well, which has been really interesting to kind of build a family business. We just thought we'd throw that in. It's really casual time in our lives. But
When you've got so much spare time.
yes, so much spare time. I've just got a bit of a let's see what we can do energy. But
And
I
that
think
comes with hope, by the way. So
does it?
Well, you may have wanted to punch hope in the face very often, but in the end, hope is the alchemy that turns your life around, and that comes from let's have a go, let's see, possibility, maybe, how far.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel there's an audaciousness sometimes to all of that. But equally, the one expectation I can't let go of is let's see. You know, it's just sort of what else can you do? Keep saying yes, keep creating opportunities. And it took a really long time to have our family, you know,
Yeah,
really long time. And it
yeah,
was really hard. And I'm
yeah,
really happy that that is actually something that I don't have to do anymore.
yes.
And so what's next, you know? And I'm not quite at the point because of health and those various commitments and parts of life that come at, you know, just turned 40 last a couple of weeks ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I feel so many people write to you and say 40s are great. And actually I've had like quite a really hard first few weeks of it in terms of health. So I've sort of found that provoking a bit of a rueful laugh so far, but I'm assured they get even better. But I am intrigued what that second, it's not
Phase.
second half or second phase might look like. So I think when I'm not, you know, completely bone tired and nose up against children and whatever else, that sparkle is still there, that spark for it.
And that's a wonderful thing. Your sparkle is still there.
It's got to try and keep hold of it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that's a wonderful place to end.
Thank you.
Hello, Sophie Samuel. We are going to talk about my wonderful conversation with Emma Barnett. And as I read the book, I thought a lot about you, all of my daughters and my daughter-in-law, who've done a lot of maternity service in the last decades. And I kind of chimed with everything she said and her confidence to say things in a way that I never could have said or even knew that I felt. But what was your response?
Yes, well, I love the term maternity service. I'm most definitely adopting that one. And I like that it held both. It both held the sort of love in service, right? It's not like just drudgery and duty, but it is service. And it's such a sort of quiet form of hard work. Before today, I was sitting in this cafe that's very popular with mums with young babies. And I just thought, if you don't know any better, you look at it and you think it looks lovely. Oh, I'm sitting in a cafe with a cup of tea and a baby. Having been inside the bodies and heads, or my version of that, knowing how unbelievably stressed you can be sitting in a cafe with a baby.
Having been up all night.
Yeah, how miserable you can feel in that moment, or just overwhelmed. But it doesn't look like that from the outside, which I think is part of the misconception often for people who haven't necessarily had children. But one of the things I thought about when I was listening to her is I was thinking, I don't think you and I spoke about what it's like before I had a baby. I remember seeing Tash having a baby and having this like reality check big time of like, I remember seeing her crying while breastfeeding because it hurt so much. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea it was this brutal. Do you think that was a conscious decision from you not to talk to us about it? Or was it? Or do you remember that we did and I've just forgotten? Or do you think you were trying to protect us? Or maybe you didn't find it as hard as I found it?
You always ask these tough questions.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't trying to be tough. I was trying to be genuinely curious because you were talking about protecting. And I wondered, did you want to protect us or did it feel like just,
It never crossed my mind to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Literally.
That's so interesting.
I mean, I am a therapist of 35 years. And I remember each of you saying in your own different ways, no one told me it was this hard. And I mean, I do remember how hard it was, and it was really hard. And I had really good support. But I remember the physical pain, the exhaustion, the listlessness, the shaping of oneself. So I remember all that. And I actually just think I just followed the social norms of protection unconsciously. Like no one talked to me about it, obviously, or not my parents.
Obviously. That's a given.
But you'd have thought that I would bloody well have the insight to say, by the way, this is really hard. But I didn't.
But I do think it's a hard one. Like I really loved, as you know, and we did an interview with her on Instagram, Lucy Jones's book, Matrescence. And I loved it because I also loved Rachel Cusk because it felt like they put words to experiences that I really struggled to put words to. And firstly, I think it is quite hard to put words to those experiences, or at least I found it hard, particularly when you're in it and you're so overwhelmed. But I also think I've thought, would I give that book to someone before they had a baby? And I'm not totally sure. There is a part that hesitates in me that goes, I don't want to scare them. You know, they might not have that experience. You know, how helpful is it? So I also wondered whether there was also a consciousness, like, how much do you tell somebody? Because I had a very tricky first birth. And
oh my God, that just did my head in. Yeah.
And would it have helped the process afterwards if I had known beforehand how scary it can be? It's like yes and no, because I think what would have helped is if maybe some conversation had beforehand, such that on the other hand, someone had been there, been like, this is normal.
I mean, I don't know if this is me sounding defensive, because I think I would have always said whatever you were feeling, it was normal. I'm sure I did say that.
Yeah, I certainly don't have any memory of you saying that wasn't normal, or that you was definitely not. I think more I meant does it help with the conversation on the other side if you've had the conversation before, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Like if you could help join the dots. Like this is a weird comparison, but when I'm working with someone in prison before, we'd have lots of conversations about what it might be like on the other side of prison, so that when it was laid out on the other side of release, you'd be like, do you remember what we talked about? I mean, I'm not about people coaching each other. I'm just wondering what the right answer is.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think it's a really good question. I think what's very interesting about Emma and the conversation we had and reading that wonderful book is that she wrote the book as she was in the maternity service, and that even her memory of the baby she'd had before had faded.
Mm.
And so you have to kind of be in the lived experience of in it to write. And we know from our brains that we store a memory in one format, and then we take it out if it's in a happy environment, or we look at photographs and then we restore it with a different emotion. And I certainly think I would never have had 4 children if I'd remembered how painful it was every time. I definitely managed to kind of forget.
Yes.
And I think it's very unique. Like, some people really would want to read that book, and Rachel Cusk and Lucy Jones, because preparation is everything to them, because that gives them a feeling of control. And a lot of people need a feeling of control. Like, this is normal. And for other people, it would then put into their minds a frightening experience that would put them off and send fear through their system, which may not be helpful for them.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's never really one answer, is there? And also, I think there's something also about it that just is hard, right? You could talk to someone about it before, you can talk to them about it after. It's also just a hard experience, the way grief is a hard transformational experience. You do lose yourself, and you do have to go through a process of finding yourself again in the new way that you've been put back together through it. As such a challenge, not a bad experience, but such a challenging experience for maybe bad moments.
In This Too Shall Pass, I wrote about a man becoming a father, and that it was like a loss. It was a living loss of the freedom he had before, and that the relationship was so different. And it is a big transition.
It's also nice to hear someone with so much ferocity finding it hard. She liked it, and I liked your phrase of a sort of hope as a quixotic mistress. And hope is such a fascinating psychological process, isn't it? I found this quote when I was thinking about it, that from the psychologist called C.R. Snyder, who defined hope as a combination of willpower and way power. So willpower being the motivation to pursue a goal, like your willpower, like you could feel that Emma Barnett has got good willpower. So do you, Mum. And the ability to find strategies to achieve it, which is like the way power. And I really felt, funny enough, listening to it, I felt some of the resonances between you and Emma. Sometimes you talk about the part of you that's the striver, you know, it's like, or you're like, you're JSD, I just fucking do it. It's like, there was that kind of hoop in action quality.
I think what he also says, hope isn't just an emotion, Charles Snyder. He says that hope is also a plan A and a plan B, and the belief that you can make it happen. And I think that is really helpful. But that can still completely throw you when your plan A and plan B is not met.
When I think about us as a sibling in relation to someone who's invested in willpower and way power, so it's us 4 as siblings. And I was thinking, the sort of flip side to every quality, isn't there? That's a pro and a con. But that kind of ability to hold on to hope and that ferocity is such a strong characteristic. And the reason is because you have a good sense of agency, right, in the world, that I can make something happen. But then we can struggle with the times when that's not possible, when you have to sort of surrender or let go or not have control. For some of us who are not so good, maybe at the agency side of things, maybe a little bit better at the surrender.
Definitely. But actually, I think some of us are good at both the agency and the surrender. You're good at both, though.
What other things did you think about, Mum?
I thought the other thing, which is interesting, I hadn't heard of it, was the Mel Robbins Let Them.
I hadn't heard of that either.
How we can't really influence each other. And yet social media is all about influencing each other and wanting to kind of shape each other with our narratives and our images. And so I wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Quite a few. I haven't heard of it either. Just shows how out of the loop we are, Mum. But I wondered what the story behind it was, because in a way my brain goes in two different directions. One was Let Them. I listened to an interesting podcast on Therapist Uncensored, and unfortunately in this moment I can't remember the name of the person they were interviewing. She was a Black woman in the States who worked a lot in DEI, and she was talking about how she just isn't going to fight every battle. It costs her too much
weathering.
And she was like, I will not sacrifice my mind and my body over this. So talking about how now she sometimes, no, I'm not going to go to the march on Saturday. Thank you very much. I'm going to go and have a hot bath. Because part of her kind of resistance was, I will not become sick because of your racism. I will not become unwell because of your attempt to push something so unfair and unequal into my space. And if I fight every minute of it, in a way, it keeps me there and can make me ill. So I didn't know if there was any history of that in it, in which case I kind of understood that. Like, let them, just don't engage sometimes. Or I was also thinking, or is it more of that, like, oh, sod it, you can't change anybody? Had a more of a cynical flavor to it. And I think just influence and power is a very complex, subtle thing we don't really understand. It's like therapy, right? Most of us don't really understand why therapy works in the way that it does. There's a lot of research and there's increasing neuroscience, and we're trying to put science behind something that we have a knowing about by being in the room already. I was listening today to a Carolyn Spring, who, if anyone's interested in trauma, is a very brilliant trainer in trauma. And she was talking about shame, and she was talking about therapy, and she was talking about therapy as a very right brain to right brain process rather than left brain to left brain process, as in rather than a verbal concepts driven in the way that psychoeducation, which can also be helpful, is it's more of an intuitive gut relational connecting experience. And it's a very wordless, therefore quite a wordless one. So I really agreed basically with what you said, that we can't force anyone, we can't decide we want someone to change, but influencing someone is possible. But often when we're least trying to,
they have to trust us. I think trust is the currency that enables change or influence. Because I'll listen to somebody I trust, and I'll open my mind to somebody I can trust. And I'll allow myself to change my mind with somebody I trust, but I won't unless I trust them. So trust is essential.
Yes, and in a way, we're talking about the difference between control and change. You can control someone through fear, and they then are impacted by that, but not change on the inside. That's a different process, right? That therapeutic shift, and one's about force, you control, and the other is about change and trust, I guess, and kind of intrinsic shifting because you want to, because you're open to it.
And where that takes me to a sort of end, which is that I think this book, Maternity Service, I trust it because I trust the honesty with which it has been written, and the authenticity and the kind of heart and the intention that comes with it, which is both the love for the child and that we're all unique and it's not making lots of assumptions, but is also naming in a way that is wonderfully empowering, I think, and declaiming like maternity leave is not the right effing word. Like, this is maternity
not a bloody
service.
holiday.
It's not a bloody holiday. You don't have fun and remember every moment. And I think that's a really important foothold in changing the narrative around motherhood in particular, but parenthood in general. You know, I think mental health comes from facing reality as it is rather than what we kind of imagine it will be. And so I think having that as a sort of template we can go and look at and have it look back at us and mirror our own experience and affirm our own experience can give us confidence.
Yeah. Even when you're reading a book, it's a conversation, isn't it? You know, it's an emotional conversation inside you. You trust her voice. And so you let her voice in, and then it allows you to see or think or shift things differently inside yourself, isn't it?
And I wish I had told you myself.
And I still don't know if it would have helped.
Thank you very much, Emma, for a really powerful conversation and for opening a door to a new way of looking at motherhood that I think we really need, that is a refresh that is essential. And I'm sure the book will do really well and get into lots of people's hands, which I hope it does.